Stone was laid where water should have ruled, and what was meant to vanish endured. Along the cold edge of the northern sea, silence gathered beneath timber halls and wind-scoured earth. Beneath the prayers that faded and the banners that rotted, chambers were shaped not for shelter, but for waiting. They were sealed without ceremony and trusted to time alone. Salt crept above them. Kingdoms shifted their weight. Yet below, the dark remained disciplined and still. These hollows did not serve the present, they served what came after forgetting. Hands that built them did not linger to explain. They withdrew, certain that stone remembers better than men. What was hidden there did not resist fire or decree, it simply refused to surface. The shore learned new names, the sea learned new borders. Beneath both, the cisterns endured, holding more than water, and less than truth, resting patiently where memory sleeps. The coast lay open to every wind, yet it did not yield itself. Sand and stone shared the surface without argument, and the sea moved against them with a patience older than memory. What appeared bare had been weighed and measured long before name settled upon it. The land nearest the water learned early how to endure passing feet without belonging to them. Paths formed and faded, but the ground beneath remained disciplined, bearing traces of intent invisible to those who crossed it. Timber halls rose where ships could rest, and fires were lit where men waited for tides to turn, yet the shore itself resisted becoming claimed. It functioned as a margin, neither interior nor fully exposed, shaped by use rather than ownership. Into this unsettled ground, stone was lowered with care. The act was quiet, undertaken without signal or witness. Soil was parted not to reveal treasure, but to receive weight. Each stone pressed downward altered the behavior of the land above it. Moisture shifted its course. Frost took longer to settle. The ground held firm where it might have slumped. These changes were not proclaimed, yet they were felt. Builders trusted places they could not explain. Wells drawn near these hidden spaces yielded water that remained cool and unspoiled, even when others failed. Foundations laid above them endured storms that scattered less considered works. The voids beneath the shore were shaped with restraint. They did not sprawl or invite wandering. They accepted darkness as a condition, not a flaw. Their walls were smooth where they needed to be, rough where grip was required. Nothing decorative intruded upon their purpose. They were not built to impress the living eye, but to remain legible to time. Stone met stone with intervals calculated for pressure and breath. Water was permitted entry only under control, guided through channels that taught it where to linger and where to pass on. Silence was not an absence there, but a material held as carefully as any block. Above, the coast continued its visible labor. Ships arrived heavy with timber and left lighter. Salt dried on ropes and skin alike. Men waited for favorable winds and spoke little while they did. Beneath their feet, the ground had been instructed to remember. The presence of the hidden altered the habits of those who knew nothing of it. Storage became reliable in certain places without reason given. Goods left in one hall endured the damp that ruined another. The shore gained a reputation for steadiness that exceeded its appearance. Trust formed slowly, attached to location rather than to name. Time passed without announcement. Generations worked the same stretches of land, unaware that their certainty rested upon depth rather than surface. Children learned where the ground felt solid even after rain. Elders noticed which wells could be drawn from in lean seasons. No one spoke of cause. Effect was enough. The land trained its inhabitants to accept outcomes without demanding explanation. In this way, secrecy required no guardians. It was maintained through ordinary use, through repetition that dulled curiosity and replaced it with habit. The sea continued its work as well, reshaping the visible edge with each season. Storms tore away what was poorly set. Harbors were rebuilt farther inland, then edged outward again when the waters receded. Through these changes, the hidden spaces below remained intact. Their depth placed them beyond the reach of sudden violence. Even when floods came, the water that entered them was expected and guided, leaving no mark once it withdrew. The shore above might scar and heal, but beneath, continuity held. Those who passed through sensed something they could not name. The coast felt older than its structures, steadier than its climate. It did not invite settlement in the manner of fertile plains, yet it sustained movement without collapse. Traders lingered longer than necessary, resting their cargo where it seemed safest. Messengers paused, not from fatigue, but from an unspoken confidence that delay there would not cost them. The land did not speak, yet it instructed. Stone lowered into damp soil carries weight beyond itself. It teaches the earth how to behave. Each concealed chamber beneath the shore altered the relationship between surface and depth. The ground learned to carry silence without strain. This training accumulated. One void reinforced another, even when separated by distance. Together, they formed a quiet foundation that did not declare its extent. The shore became less an edge and more a threshold, a place where passage could slow without stopping, where waiting felt natural rather than imposed. As seasons turned, the memory of construction faded entirely. No songs marked the labor, no records praised its completion. The work had not been done for recognition, it had been done to change how the land would respond long after hands withdrew. The absence of acknowledgement ensured endurance. Without story, there was nothing to betray. What remained was effect woven so tightly into daily life that it became indistinguishable from nature. The coast continued to appear spare and honest. Wind moved freely. Salt gathered and fell away. Fires were lit and extinguished. Above, nothing suggested depth. Below, the ground held what had been entrusted to it, not as a burden, but as a quiet alignment. The shore learned to conceal not through effort, but through design, and in that concealment, it acquired a steadiness that neither storm nor neglect could easily undo. The steadiness shaped below began to govern how the shore itself was understood. Those who worked the land came to rely on its temper without naming the reason. They placed heavy beams where the ground accepted them and avoided other stretches where the earth shifted under lesser loads. Over time, these preferences hardened into custom. Halls rose where depth had already been disciplined. Paths curved subtly toward zones of unseen strength. What had been deliberate beneath became instinct above. The landscape learned to guide human choice without instruction. In winter, when frost locked lesser soils into brittle fracture, these places resisted cracking. Snow lingered evenly rather than pooling, and meltwater drained away with patience. The ground breathed slowly, absorbing cold and releasing it without violence. Such behavior was noticed, though rarely spoken of. It entered the language of builders and farmers as observation stripped of cause. Certain stretches were simply known to be reliable. The shore, long treated as uncertain margin, acquired pockets of quiet trust. This trust altered how waiting was endured. Ships delayed by weather rested longer without fear of loss. Goods stored near the waterline did not rot as expected. Grain held its dryness. Iron did not bloom with rust. Even parchment survived where damp should have claimed it. These outcomes reshaped behavior. Men planned differently, not by calculation, but by experience. They returned to the same sites, repeating use until repetition itself masked intention. The hidden had succeeded in becoming ordinary. The earth itself adjusted to the discipline imposed upon it. Soil compacted around the stone below, strengthening its hold. Roots encountered resistance and turned aside, preserving the chambers without effort. Burrowing animals avoided the depths, guided by pressures they could not penetrate. Over time, the voids beneath the shore became stable absences, places where collapse did not occur because collapse had been anticipated and denied. Even neglect could not undo what had been aligned so carefully with the land's own tendencies. Silence above ground reinforced silence below. No markers distinguished these places from any other stretch of coast. Fires burned, laughter carried, disputes rose and fell. The land absorbed all of it without revealing its interior order. The absence of distinction protected what lay beneath better than walls ever could. Nothing invites disturbance like declaration. Here, nothing was declared. The shore learned to keep what it held by refusing to acknowledge that it held anything at all. As years layered into decades and decades into lifetimes, the relationship between surface and depth settled into equilibrium. The cisterns did not draw attention, yet they shaped expectation. Builders trusted their measures because measures had proven trustworthy. The coast acquired a rhythm that balanced exposure and restraint. It allowed movement without surrender. It accepted weight without fracture. This balance was not the result of chance. It was the slow consequence of design meeting patience. Occasionally repairs were made above ground that brushed close to the hidden spaces. A post driven too deep met unexpected resistance. A trench filled more quickly than anticipated. In such moments, work slowed rather than forced its way forward. The land taught caution. Obstacles were respected without investigation. The interruption was smoothed over, not challenged. Thus, preservation occurred not through secrecy alone, but through a culture of restraint that treated resistance as instruction. The shore's character deepened. What had once seemed empty acquired gravity without clutter. Travelers sensed it in the way sound carried differently, muffled without echo. Even the sea's voice softened near certain stretches, its force absorbed by unseen arrangements below. Storms still came, but their damage was uneven, sparing places shaped by depth. Over time, this unevenness appeared as fortune. In truth, it was consequence. No single hand guided these outcomes now. The original intent had passed fully into effect. The system required no tending, no defense, no explanation. It existed as alignment rather than mechanism. The ground had been taught how to hold absence without collapse, and it continued the lesson without supervision. This was the quiet triumph of the work, not endurance through vigilance, but endurance through surrender to time's slower currents. The coast remained unsettled ground, yet no longer unstable. Passage continued to matter more than possession, but passage itself became safer, more predictable. What moved through the shore did so underwritten by depth. The voids beneath accepted pressure without protest, allowing the surface to remain open and adaptable. In this way, concealment served continuity rather than confinement. As the years carried on, the memory of why certain places endured faded entirely. Only the endurance itself remained, woven into daily life as fact rather than mystery. The land did not advertise its instruction. It allowed those who depended on it to believe that reliability had always been there. Beneath wind, salt, and tide, the hidden spaces continued their work without motion, holding silence as others might hold water, steady and unchanged, while the shore above lived and forgot. They moved along the coast as those accustomed to passage rather than arrival. Their presence did not announce itself with banners or claims. It settled lightly, almost provisionally, as if ready to lift again with the tide. They followed paths already worn by timber dragged from inland forests, by amber traded hand to hand, by salt carried in sacks that whitened the seams. These routes belonged to no single power. They were habits of movement older than authority, and into these habits the newcomers folded themselves without disturbance. Their attention lingered where others passed quickly. They paused at inlets where fresh water met the sea and watched how the current hesitated before choosing a course. They pressed their weight into soil with measured steps, noting where it yielded and where it resisted. They listened for the deep quiet beneath the noise of waves, the slower rhythm that governed what endured after storms withdrew. Nothing about this labor demanded recognition. It required patience, and patience leaves little trace. They did not gather crowds or compel labor by voice. Their authority traveled through instruction given quietly, often to hands that did not know its source. Measurements were taken at dawn and dusk, when the shore revealed its truest temper. Lines were drawn and erased. Stones were tested, not for beauty, but for how they bore pressure when set against damp earth. The coast was read as one might read an old surface worn smooth by use, its strengths inferred rather than declared. Where others raised walls and timbers toward the sky, these builders turned their effort downward. They did not compete with the horizon. They worked beneath it. Early works were small and easily overlooked, placed where later eyes would assume natural irregularity. A floor laid thicker than needed, a post set deeper than customary, a hollow shaped beneath what appeared complete. Each act was modest, yet cumulative. Nothing called attention to itself, and nothing was meant to. Their understanding of the shore was shaped by its dual nature. Above, it shifted with weather and season, accepting and shedding what touched it. Below, it held fast if approached correctly. This contrast guided their hand. They trusted depth over display. What mattered was not how a structure appeared in its first season, but how it behaved when forgotten. They prepared for absence more carefully than for presence. The first cisterns were born of this restraint. They were not ambitious chambers, nor were they hidden through cunning. They were placed where the land itself offered concealment through indifference. Their shapes were simple, governed by proportion rather than ornament. Stone was laid to accept darkness as its condition. Water was invited only as needed, its path directed with quiet certainty. These spaces were meant to endure without tending, to remain stable even when memory thinned. Those who labored on them did not linger to admire the work. Once the stone was set and the earth returned, they withdrew with the same discretion that had marked their arrival. Above, life resumed without interruption. Fires were lit. Cargo was shifted. The shore absorbed the alteration without remark. Yet its behavior had changed. Moisture traveled differently. Weight distributed itself with greater confidence. These changes were subtle, but they accumulated, shaping how the land responded to use. The builders' refusal to speak of permanence was itself a form of preparation. They did not promise that their work would last. They arranged it so that it would not require promise. By aligning with the coast's deeper tendencies, they allowed time to become an ally rather than a threat. Neglect, which ruins most works, was anticipated and neutralized. The cisterns did not depend on vigilance. They depended on alignment. Human presence brushed against this work without recognizing it. A porter set down his load and felt the ground steady beneath him. A shipwright stored planks near the waterline and found them unspoiled weeks later. Such moments passed without comment. Cause did not demand acknowledgement when effect proved reliable. The newcomer's greatest success lay in becoming indistinguishable from the shore's own habits. As seasons turned, the pattern repeated along the coast. New sites were chosen not for prominence, but for suitability. The work followed movement, never forcing it. It respected existing rhythms and slipped beneath them. Each cistern joined a growing, unseen continuity, though none were marked as belonging to a larger design. Fragmentation protected coherence. No single place held enough meaning to betray the whole. The builders' understanding of danger was implicit rather than declared. They did not name threats, yet their actions assumed them. Fire, decree, and neglect were treated as eventualities rather than possibilities. Stone answered these with silence. Depth answered them with patience. Long before any hand was raised against what could be seen, precaution had already settled into the ground where it could not be addressed. Their passage along the shore ended without ceremony. There was no departure to mark, no trace to follow. What remained was not a legacy in the spoken sense, but a condition. The coast behaved differently after they passed through it. It held weight with greater assurance. It preserved what was set upon it with quiet fidelity. These outcomes belonged to the land now, not to those who had shaped them. Time accepted this arrangement readily. Without names attached, there was nothing to contest. The cisterns waited without expectation, shaped to survive both use and abandonment. Above them, the shore continued its traffic of goods and people, unaware that precaution had been laid beneath its feet long before danger ever learned its own name. The movement they practiced left little behind except altered ground. Once the initial works were sealed, attention turned to how the shore carried what passed over it. Observation replaced labor. They returned to certain sites not to adjust stone, but to watch how weather and use tested what had been placed below. When storms drove waves farther inland, the surface suffered as expected, yet the deeper works remained unchanged. When frost hardened the earth, cracks formed above and faded again, never reaching what lay beneath. Each season confirmed what had already been assumed. The land responded according to its deeper alignment, not its visible disorder. This confirmation required no correction. The cisterns were complete the moment they ceased to demand care. Their success lay in how thoroughly they disappeared into function. Above them, floors were swept, goods stacked, and fires banked for the night. Nothing in these ordinary acts hinted at preparation or foresight. The shore's behavior simply grew more dependable. Those who worked it adjusted their habits accordingly, unaware that their confidence rested upon spaces shaped to outlast them. The builders' presence thinned as their purpose fulfilled itself. Instruction became unnecessary. Others learned where to place weight through imitation rather than command. Knowledge diffused without explanation. A young hand copied the practice of an older one, not knowing that both followed a pattern established long before either arrived. This quiet inheritance ensured continuity without record. Memory was carried in behavior rather than in speech. The coast itself began to reflect this hidden order. Its irregularities softened where depth had been disciplined. Water drained evenly. Settling slowed. Even the sound of footsteps changed, duller where the ground held firm. These details registered without interpretation. They became part of the shore's character, absorbed into the way people described it without understanding why. It was known as a place where things endured longer than expected. The cisterns' modesty protected them further. They were never mistaken for treasure. No one sought them out because no one imagined them worth seeking. Their entrances blended into foundations or vanished beneath later work. Even when alterations were made above, the deeper spaces endured, untouched. The builders had trusted that neglect would prove a stronger shield than secrecy enforced by force, and time confirmed this trust. As movement along the coast continued, the unseen network grew only in effect, not in form. No new chambers were required for its influence to spread. The pattern established itself through repetition rather than expansion. Each successful endurance reinforced confidence elsewhere. Builders adopted deeper foundations as habit. Storage favored certain stretches without recorded reason. The original works did not multiply, yet their principles propagated quietly through imitation. Those who had shaped the first cisterns did not return to claim recognition or oversight. Their absence was complete. What remained belonged wholly to the land and to those who used it without question. In this withdrawal, the work reached its intended state. It no longer depended on intention. It functioned as condition. The shore, long treated as transient space between land and sea, gained a subtle gravity. It no longer merely received passage, it absorbed it. Goods paused there without loss. Men waited there without impatience. Even conflict passed over it lightly, finding no anchor in ground that refused to hold anything except what had been entrusted to depth. This quality was not celebrated, it was simply relied upon. Time moved on, unremarkable in its passage. New hands worked old places, new structures rose over disciplined ground. The cisterns beneath accepted the added weight without strain. Their endurance did not require acknowledgement. It expressed itself through absence of failure, rather than presence of sign. Where others repaired and replaced, these places simply remained. Thus, the arrival without trumpets achieved its lasting form. Nothing declared it finished. Nothing marked its success. The coast continued as it always had, shaped by wind and water above, governed by stone and patience below. The first movement had passed quietly into consequence, and the shore carried that consequence forward, steady and unspoken, as generations crossed it without ever knowing why it held. The work below ground unfolded according to order that did not tolerate excess. Each measure was taken twice, not from doubt, but from reverence for balance. Stone was not forced into place. It was persuaded, set according to weight and counterweight, so that pressure resolved itself inward rather than outward. Courses were laid with a patience that ignored haste entirely. The pattern was simple to the eye, yet exacting to the hand, repeating intervals that allowed the earth to settle without complaint. What appeared restrained was in truth rigorous, governed by laws older than any voice that named them. The shaping of space followed sequence rather than chance. One chamber did not exist alone, nor did it multiply without relation. Each followed another as step follows step, never branching, never confusing. Movement through these spaces required memory, not strength. Turns were placed where the body would expect them, passages narrowed where pace was meant to slow. The builders did not seek to disorient, they sought to preserve order even in darkness. The mind, guided gently, would not resist. Water was treated with particular respect. It was neither enemy nor guest, but a force to be acknowledged and directed. Channels were cut with subtle inclinations so slight that flow seemed to hesitate before obeying. This hesitation preserved calm. Water entered when invited, moved where instructed, and departed without leaving trace. Stagnation was denied through angle alone. Flood was rendered impossible by patience rather than wall. The system trusted water enough to allow its presence, yet never surrendered authority over it. Access to these depths was never convenient. Openings were placed where habit concealed them. A step taken slightly aside, a stone that lifted without seam, a shadow that fell differently at certain hours. These points did not announce themselves. They required familiarity rather than search. This reliance on memory protected the system better than any barrier. What could not be found by force could not be taken by force. Above ground, days passed without alteration. Livelihood continued in simple patterns. Fires were lit at dusk. Goods were counted and recounted. The shore lived its visible life without reference to what lay beneath. This separation was deliberate. The underground order did not demand acknowledgement. It functioned independently, maturing in stillness. Its success was measured not by use, but by endurance. Nothing decorative intruded upon these works. There were no marks left for admiration, no symbols to invite interpretation. Even tool impressions were smoothed away where they served no structural purpose. The absence of ornament was not austerity, but focus. Every element existed to support continuity. Beauty, where it appeared, arose from proportion rather than intent. Stone met stone cleanly. Space resolved itself into calm. The effect was not meant to be seen, yet it was unmistakable to those who knew how to feel it. The discipline extended to anticipation of failure. Collapse was not treated as misfortune, but as a condition to be addressed before it could occur. Loads were distributed so that no single point carried excess strain. Voids were shaped to absorb pressure rather than resist it. When the earth shifted, as it always does, the system yielded just enough to remain whole. This yielding was not weakness, it was alignment. Flooding, too, was accounted for without fear. Channels accepted more than they required, allowing sudden abundance to pass through without harm. Overflow was guided away from vulnerable joints. The cisterns did not oppose water, they trained it. In doing so, they ensured survival through seasons that erased less disciplined works entirely. As time passed, the system deepened its own stability. Stones settled into earth. Earth accepted stone as boundary rather than intrusion. The distinction between built and natural softened. What had been placed below became part of the ground's own reasoning. Even abandonment could not undo this alignment. Without hands to tend them, the cisterns continued to behave as intended. Their discipline did not require supervision. This order reflected a belief held without proclamation. Survival was not achieved through display or dominance. It was achieved through patience, through structures that anticipated forgetting. Visibility invited challenge. Silence endured. By withdrawing their work from sight, the builders entrusted it to time rather than to defense. Time, slow and impartial, proved a reliable keeper. The architecture below ground did not assert itself, it waited. In waiting, it fulfilled its purpose. Each chamber held its shape, each passage maintained its measure. The system matured not by expansion, but by remaining precisely what it had been shaped to be. Above, the world shifted and spoke loudly of its changes. Below, the order remained intact, unchanged and unremarked, holding continuity and stillness, aligned with the long patience that governs all that endures. The discipline below ground did not end with structure alone. It governed conduct as well, shaping how presence was permitted and how absence was preserved. Those few who moved within these spaces did so with measured pace. Sound was restrained by design, absorbed by stone and earth before it could wander. Footsteps did not echo. Voices, when used at all, fell quickly into stillness. The chambers taught restraint without instruction. Their proportions discouraged haste. Their narrowness guided the body into patience. Even breath seemed to slow in sympathy with the depth. Memory served where markings did not. No symbols were cut to guide return. Paths were learned through repetition and then entrusted to recall. This reliance on memory thinned the circle of those who could move freely below. Knowledge was not written. It was carried, and in being carried, it remained fragile enough to disappear when no longer needed. The system accepted this fragility. It did not depend on constant access. Its order held even when human familiarity faded. Each chamber bore a distinct purpose without declaring it. Some were shaped to receive and release water slowly. Others moderated the air, cooling it through contact with stone before allowing it to rise again. A few existed simply as intervals, spaces where nothing was kept, yet whose emptiness preserved the integrity of what lay beyond them. These absences were as important as the filled spaces. They absorbed pressure, allowed adjustment, and prevented stress from traveling unchecked. Emptiness was treated as a structural element, not a lack. The sequence of chambers reinforced this understanding. One prepared the next. Nothing was abrupt. Transitions were gradual, easing movement from one condition to another. This continuity protected both material and memory. Sudden change invites error. Gradual change teaches awareness. The builders understood that systems survive longest when they guide rather than compel. Time tested this order quietly. Seasons passed, bringing shifts in water level and temperature. The cisterns responded without intervention. Condensation gathered where it was intended and dispersed where it was not. Stone warmed and cooled at rates that prevented fracture. These responses were not accidents. They were the result of discipline applied at the moment of shaping, when correction was still possible. Once sealed, the system relied on its initial alignment alone. Above ground, disruptions came and went. Structures were repaired, replaced, or abandoned. None of this reached the depths. The underground order did not mirror the surface's urgency. On a different measure of time, even when surface activity increased, pressure was distributed evenly below, preventing strain. The cisterns absorbed consequence without complaint, fulfilling their role as stabilizers unseen. The builders had accounted for intrusion without dramatizing it. Should an opening be forced or discovered, the sequence itself limited harm. Passages narrowed, requiring deliberate movement. Chambers revealed nothing at once. What was not meant to be known could not be grasped quickly. The system did not rely on concealment alone, but on delay. Delay frustrates impulse. It invites reconsideration. In this way, discipline protected continuity more effectively than secrecy enforced by force. As years extended into generations, the order below ground began to feel less like construction and more like condition. Stone and earth behaved as though they had always been arranged this way. Later works above adapted to what lay beneath, without understanding it. Foundations aligned themselves unconsciously with the older discipline. New structures inherited stability without inheriting knowledge. The system succeeded in becoming invisible even to those who benefited from it most. Abandonment, when it came, was anticipated and absorbed. Entrances sealed themselves through neglect. Soil crept back into seams. Moisture softened edges without weakening form. The cisterns did not resist being forgotten. Forgetting had been included in their design. What endures longest is often what asks least to be remembered. This quiet architecture of restraint mirrored a belief held without articulation. Survival did not require dominance or display. It required alignment with forces that move slowly and cannot be commanded. Stone, water, and time were treated not as obstacles, but as partners. By shaping their work to agree with these elements, the builders ensured that their absence would not undo what they had placed. The order below ground remained untroubled by the passing of authority above. Decrees did not reach it. Fires did not threaten it. Even curiosity, when it brushed close, found little to grasp. The system did not conceal treasure, it preserved continuity. Such preservation offers no immediate reward to those who seek it without patience. Thus the discipline held. Chamber followed chamber in calm relation. Water moved without sound. Stone carried weight without strain. The cisterns remained what they had been from the moment the final stone settled into place. An alignment rather than a monument. They did not speak of their makers. They did not announce their purpose. They simply endured, held together by restraint, patience, and a deep understanding that what survives longest is often what refuses to be seen. Movement along the water carried habits farther than any decree. Timber, amber, and salt continued their passage, yet beneath the exchange of goods another pattern traveled unnoticed. Where ships found new shelter, depth was considered before display. Floors were laid, piers extended, and storehouses raised, all while the ground below received familiar attention. What appeared newly shaped carried an older discipline beneath it. The work did not proclaim itself as expansion. It arrived as recognition, as if each new port merely remembered something it had always known. Those who set stone in these places followed no visible charter. Their measures repeated without instruction. Depths matched depths laid elsewhere, not by imitation, but by shared understanding. The same tolerances appeared beneath distant floors. The same patience governed water and weight. What seemed local bore the quiet mark of continuity. Without naming it, the shore learned to behave consistently across long reaches of coast. Merchants felt this before they understood it. Certain harbors preserved what others spoiled. Grain stored through long cold remained dry. Cloth resisted mold. Iron endured without undue bloom. These outcomes were noted, then relied upon. Trade shifted subtly, favoring places where loss was less frequent. Trust gathered around stone rather than name. No proclamation explained the difference. Reliability required no justification. Hands passed goods from hold to store, pausing briefly above ground shaped to remember more than those who stood upon it. In these pauses, messages traveled as well, carried without emphasis. They passed through trusted routes because those routes proved dependable. The ground beneath did not betray what rested upon it. That silence became a kind of oath, stronger for never being spoken. The reach of the hidden did not extend by conquest. It spread through preference. Where storage endured, storage was repeated. Where depth preserved, depth was copied. Builders adopted measures that worked without asking why they worked. In this way, discipline moved faster than explanation. It crossed borders that shifted with season and power. The ground did not recognize these borders. It accepted only alignment or strain. Winter tested every shore without mercy. Ice pressed against piers. Snow weighed roofs down. Damp crept where it could. In some places, stores failed and trade faltered. In others, the season passed with less damage than expected. These differences accumulated quietly in memory. Routes adjusted. Agreements followed outcome rather than promise. The hidden network extended its influence not by reach alone, but by consequence. What unified these places was not appearance. Above ground, customs varied, languages shifted, authority changed hands. Yet beneath, the behavior of stone and water remained consistent. The same calm greeted weight, the same channels guided moisture away. The same restraint prevented collapse. Those who moved between ports sensed familiarity without being able to name its source. The ground felt known even when faces did not. Standardization occurred without decree. Measures aligned because alignment endured. Where a depth proved sufficient, it was repeated. Where a channel angle prevented stagnation, it appeared again. No single mind oversaw this spread. It moved through shared outcome, carried by those who built and those who depended on what they built. The system grew without growth, extending itself by being reliable. Absence of decay became an unspoken sign. It did not announce itself, yet it altered behavior. Goods were placed with confidence. Delays were tolerated. Even disputes paused where loss was unlikely. The hidden reach shaped the tempo of exchange. It allowed time to stretch without penalty. In doing so, it softened the urgency that often fractures continuity. The shore became part of a broader order without ever being named as such. No banner marked it. No oath bound it. Yet its effects crossed regions more steadily than authority ever had. When borders shifted, the ground did not change its conduct. What lay beneath remained indifferent to surface claims. Continuity persisted where power could not. Those who benefited from this reach rarely considered its origin. They spoke of good ground and poor ground, of fortunate harbors and troublesome ones. The explanations remained simple because the causes were unseen. This simplicity protected the system. Curiosity did not sharpen where outcomes satisfied need. The hidden thrived beneath indifference. Thus, the network extended itself along the Baltic routes, not as a chain, but as a condition repeated. Each place stood alone in appearance, yet behaved as part of something larger. The reach was measured not by how far it stretched, but by how faithfully it performed. Reliability became its signature, legible only through time. The shore, once a margin between land and sea, became a carrier of continuity. It held exchange steady while surface orders rose and fell. Beneath unfamiliar floors, familiar depths waited, aligned with one another through restraint rather than command. In this way, the hidden reached far without moving, binding distant places through shared endurance that required no name to persist. Reliability, once established, altered how time itself was treated along the coast. Where loss was rare, patience became possible. Goods no longer demanded constant watching. Messages rested longer before being carried onward. This easing of urgency reshaped exchange in ways subtle, yet enduring. The hidden order beneath the ground did not hasten movement. It allowed it to slow without penalty. In this slowing, continuity deepened. Those who labored in these places adapted their craft to the ground's temperament. Storekeepers stacked higher without fear. Shipwrights left timber to season where it would not warp. Even records, fragile by nature, were trusted to spaces that moderated damp and heat without effort. The ground's behavior became part of practice, absorbed into routine as naturally as tide and weather. What lay beneath guided conduct without instruction. The unseen network did not demand uniformity of form. Structures above varied according to local custom and need. Yet beneath, a shared restraint governed how stone met earth. This restraint produced familiarity across distance. A builder moving from one harbor to another recognized the feel of a place before understanding it. The ground responded as expected. Weight settled, moisture withdrew. Such recognition bred confidence that required no explanation. As trust gathered, so did movement. Routes favored places where delay did not threaten loss. Exchange thickened where storage endured. The shore's hidden reach thus shaped patterns of travel without appearing to do so. Influence followed consequence rather than intention. The network extended itself by being chosen, again and again, by those who valued what lasted. Even where authority changed, the ground remained constant. New rulers inherited stability without having shaped it. They benefited from preserved stores and steady harbors, often mistaking endurance for fortune. Decrees were issued above ground that ignored the depths entirely, yet those depths continued their work unaffected. The hidden did not oppose power, it outlasted it. Over time, the absence of decay became woven into expectation. Loss was treated as exception rather than rule in certain places. When failure occurred elsewhere, it confirmed preference rather than provoking inquiry. The network thrived beneath this acceptance. What is expected is rarely examined. What works quietly is rarely challenged. The reach of the hidden was also felt in moments of strain. When seasons turned harsh or passage faltered, places governed by depth absorbed pressure with less disruption. Supplies carried through winter. Records survived damp months. Recovery came sooner where endurance had been built into the ground itself. These outcomes did not draw praise. They simply altered future choices. Those who moved between such places carried more than goods. They carried habits shaped by reliability. They learned to wait where waiting did not cost them. They learned to trust ground that had proven faithful. In this way, the hidden order shaped not only storage and exchange, but temperament. Calm spread along routes that once demanded haste. The network did not require awareness to function. Its greatest strength lay in remaining beneath notice. Curiosity, when it arose, found nothing to seize. There were no symbols to interpret, no declarations to contest. The ground offered only its behavior, steady and unremarkable. This absence of spectacle ensured survival across generations. As years accumulated, the distinction between natural advantage and shaped endurance blurred completely. Later builders assumed the ground had always behaved this way. They aligned new work accordingly, reinforcing the old discipline without knowing its origin. Thus, the hidden reach perpetuated itself through assumption rather than memory. The system succeeded in erasing its own beginning. The shore, bound together by these unseen consistencies, functioned as a single field of endurance despite its divisions. Distance mattered less than behavior. Places far apart answered pressure in the same manner. This sameness did not arise from command, but from shared submission to depth and patience. Unity emerged without agreement. What endured longest was not the stone alone, but the pattern of reliance it created. Exchange trusted the ground. Waiting trusted the ground. Recovery trusted the ground. Above, banners changed and names were forgotten. Below, the same quiet order continued its work, indifferent to recognition. Thus, the reach of the hidden completed its movement, not by spreading outward in visible form, but by settling inward into habit. It bound distant shores through shared endurance rather than shared rule. The coast carried this continuity forward without ever naming it, allowing stone and patience to speak only through the calm absence of loss, steady and unbroken as time moved on. The chambers were shaped to teach waiting, stone enclosed space not to confine but to steady. Their walls did not merely hold water, they held temperature, breath, and stillness in careful balance. Heat from the surface softened as it passed downward. Cold lingered without bite. Within these bounds, change slowed to a measured pace. Damp that would have spoiled elsewhere was drawn gently into stone and released without mark. Darkness settled evenly, free of glare or shadow, allowing what rested there to remain undisturbed by the passage of days. Silence was not absence, but condition. It gathered naturally within the chambers, deepened by earth and distance. Sound, once introduced, dissolved quickly, leaving no echo to trouble what lay within. This quiet was deliberate. It preserved more than objects. It preserved intention. Words written and symbols shaped retained their meaning because nothing pressed upon them. They waited without being handled, without being reminded of their own existence. The cisterns were not generous spaces. They did not invite lingering. Narrow entries and measured ceilings discouraged frequent return. This restraint protected what had been entrusted to them. Visits were meant to be rare, purposeful, and brief. Each descent carried weight, not of danger, but of consequence. What was placed within was acknowledged as something meant to outlast immediate need. The chambers taught restraint by their very form. Stone absorbed damp as skin absorbs warmth. It did so slowly, without saturation, preventing the sudden bloom that destroys fragile matter. Air moved through the spaces in gentle exchange, guided by channels that neither rushed nor stalled. This movement prevented stagnation without disturbing rest. Everything was balanced toward preservation rather than access. The cisterns did not offer convenience. They offered endurance. Within these bounds, goods remained as they were left. Grain kept its integrity. Cloth held its weave. Metals resisted decay. More delicate still, records endured. Ink did not bleed. Parchment did not curl beyond use. Symbols cut into softer material did not erode. Darkness slowed the wear of sight. Silence prevented careless handling. The chambers extended the life of meaning as much as of matter. These spaces also held emptiness by design. Not every chamber was filled. Some existed solely to maintain interval, to separate what must not press against itself. Absence served preservation. By allowing space to remain unused, pressure was relieved elsewhere. This controlled absence prevented strain and invited stability. The builders understood that fullness everywhere invites collapse. Balance requires restraint. Time behaved differently within these depths. Days did not announce themselves. Seasons softened. What rested there seemed to slip free of the surface rhythm. This separation was not complete, but sufficient. The chambers offered refuge from haste. They did not stop time. They slowed its teeth. In doing so, they transformed hiding into patience rather than fear. The act of placing something within a cistern was deliberate and final in tone. It acknowledged distance from immediate reach. Yet it was not surrender, it was trust extended forward. What was set aside was not abandoned. It was entrusted to conditions designed to preserve it beyond the span of constant attention. Forgetting was accepted as part of the process, not as loss. Forgetting served preservation as much as stone. What is remembered too often is worn by use. What is forgotten rests. The cisterns relied upon this truth. They were built to allow memory to sleep without erasing it. Retrieval was possible because decay had been denied. The chambers held the space between remembrance and loss, maintaining readiness without demand. These spaces did not distinguish between types of value. They preserved what was placed within them without judgment. Goods, records, and symbols shared the same restraint. The cisterns did not protect through secrecy alone. They protected through indifference to surface urgency. They were not defensive works. They did not anticipate attack. They anticipated neglect and answered it with endurance. Their design reflected faith in the future without naming it. The builders trusted that what mattered would matter again, even if no one present could imagine when. This trust did not require prophecy. It required patience shaped into stone. The cisterns embodied this patience. They waited without longing, confident that alignment with time would prove sufficient. The chambers were rarely disturbed once sealed. Their strength increased through disuse. Each year untouched confirmed their purpose. They did not decay through idleness. They perfected themselves in stillness. The earth above pressed gently downward, reinforcing their form rather than threatening it. Pressure became protection. Thus the cisterns stood at the heart of the system not through dominance but through quiet service. They did not assert themselves. They received. They held. They waited. Their purpose exceeded water because water was only one expression of what they preserved. At their core lay trust shaped into structure, a belief that continuity does not require constant witness. What rested within them belonged equally to past and future, held in suspension between the two. The chambers did not bridge time by motion. They bridged it by stillness. In their darkness, meaning endured without effort, guarded by stone, silence, and the slow patience that governs all that survives. The cisterns altered the understanding of preservation itself. They taught that endurance was not achieved by sealing things away in fear, but by placing them within conditions that respected their nature. Stone did not imprison what it received, it steadied it. Darkness did not erase form, it softened the demands placed upon it. Silence did not suffocate meaning, it relieved it of the burden of response. Within these chambers, objects and records were allowed to exist without being used, a state more protective than constant handling. Those who entrusted items to these depths did so with ceremony restrained to gesture rather than speech. There was no proclamation of importance. The act itself carried gravity. What was lowered into the cistern was acknowledged as something whose value lay beyond the present moment. Hands moved carefully, not from fear of damage, but from respect for the interval being created. Once set in place, items were not adjusted or admired. They were released to stillness. The chambers themselves seemed to accept this trust. Their surfaces did not crumble or flake. Moisture gathered and departed without harm. Even scent faded gently, leaving the air neutral and calm. This neutrality protected what lay within from intrusion by the senses. Without smell, without sound, without shifting light, objects were freed from the gradual erosion that attention brings. They were permitted to remain as they were, neither advancing nor retreating. The cisterns did not require guarding. Their protection lay in their lack of invitation. No comfort awaited those who lingered there. No space encouraged gathering. The environment itself insisted upon brevity. This restraint prevented misuse and preserved intention. What was meant to rest did so undisturbed, not through force but through design that discouraged excess. Over time, the chambers acquired a quality that could be felt without being named. They held calm with weight. Entering them carried a subtle shift, not of danger, but of scale. The surface world receded. Urgency loosened its grip. Even those unfamiliar with the deeper purpose sensed that these spaces were not meant for activity. They were meant for holding what could not be carried forward openly. The preservation of records within these depths extended beyond material survival. Meaning itself was slowed. Symbols did not lose their force through repetition or casual glance. They remained potent because they were not consumed. When eventually retrieved, they retained the gravity of rarity. The cisterns thus protected not only form, but significance. They prevented dilution through overexposure. This discipline of restraint echoed outward. Those who used the cisterns learned to separate what must remain accessible from what must endure. Not everything was placed below. Only what required long patience was entrusted to depth. This discernment shaped behavior above ground as well. Immediate needs were met openly. Enduring matters were set aside. The cisterns taught proportion between use and preservation. The chambers also preserved absence itself. Empty space within them was not wasted. It acted as buffer, allowing pressure to distribute evenly. This emptiness absorbed movement and change without transmitting strain. In doing so, it protected filled spaces more effectively than solid mass could have. The builders had understood that what is not placed can be as important as what is. Absence became a tool, shaped as carefully as stone. As years passed, the cisterns' role deepened without alteration. They did not adapt to new circumstances. They endured them. Their relevance did not depend on constant access. Even when unused, they continued to function as intended, holding readiness rather than activity. This readiness distinguished them from storehouses meant for frequent exchange. They were not part of daily rhythm. They existed outside it. The act of forgetting, so often treated as loss, was here transformed into preservation. By allowing memory to lapse, the cisterns protected what might otherwise have been worn thin by use or debate. When attention returned, it did so to something intact rather than exhausted. Forgetting became interval rather than erasure. The chambers held that interval open. These spaces did not resist discovery, yet they did not encourage it. Their entrances yielded only to those who remembered where to place their hands and feet. This reliance on memory ensured that retrieval remained intentional. Nothing was stumbled upon by accident. What was brought back into light was done so deliberately, with awareness of its weight. The cisterns thus governed not only preservation but reappearance. The future for which they were built was not imagined in detail. No specific return was predicted. The chambers embodied trust without expectation. They accepted that what mattered might matter again in ways unforeseen. This acceptance freed the builders from the need to control outcome. They shaped conditions, not events. Time was allowed to determine when stillness would give way to use. In this way, the cisterns stood apart from both defense and concealment. They were not reactions to threat. They were commitments to continuity. Their existence declared, without words, that endurance could be shaped deliberately, that patience could be built, that meaning could be entrusted to stone and silence without vanishing. At their heart lay a simple alignment. What is protected best is what is allowed to rest. The cisterns embodied this truth in every measure and interval. They did not hurry what they held toward return. They did not fear delay. They accepted the long gaps between remembrance as natural, even necessary. Thus the chambers remained untouched for lengths of time that erased surface concerns entirely. Empires shifted, routes changed, names fell out of use. Beneath these changes, the cisterns continued their quiet labor. They held what had been given to them without alteration, preserving not through vigilance, but through stillness. In their depths, trust took physical form. Stone bore weight without complaint. Darkness sheltered without obscuring. Silence guarded without force. The cisterns fulfilled their purpose by refusing to seek acknowledgement. They waited, as they had been shaped to do, holding meaning in suspension between what had been and what might yet return, calm and unbroken as time passed above them. The change arrived without warning, carried on its face. Authority, once indifferent, learned to look closely. It turned its weight toward what could be counted and named. Stone halls were measured not for their strength but for their allegiance. Names were lifted from record as easily as they had once been inscribed. What stood in daylight became the object of attention, for daylight is where power believes itself most certain. Decree followed decree, moving faster than understanding, certain that visibility equaled truth. Fire traveled the familiar routes. It moved across beams and roofs, across storehouses whose contents had once endured quietly. What could be reached was scattered or seized. What could be named was renamed or erased. The shore felt the pressure of command, heavy and insistent, pressing upon surfaces that had never been meant to carry such weight. Above ground, the rhythm of life fractured, work halted, movement hesitated. The visible world answered force with loss. Below, nothing stirred. The ground did not rise to defend itself. It did not offer explanation. The cisterns remained as they had been shaped, indifferent to accusation. Their entrances, never meant for ease, responded as designed. Some closed beneath falling debris. Others vanished beneath deliberate alteration that left no mark worth noting. Access did not need to be denied by guard or wall. It dissolved through neglect and collapse, indistinguishable from ordinary ruin. What authority sought to seize could not be found because it had never declared itself present. Those who searched beneath floors and within foundations found only earth behaving as earth should. There were no ledgers to list what had been placed below. No maps survived to point the way. Confession, when demanded, had nothing to offer. Memory had been thinned long before it could be extracted. The system had never relied on a single keeper. Knowledge had been carried lightly, allowed to fade where danger approached. What remained was alignment without witness. Efforts to catalog the unseen failed because there was nothing to catalog in the language of power. Stone revealed no markings. Water flowed where it always had. Absence resisted measurement. The deeper order did not resist inquiry. It simply did not respond to it. Authority, accustomed to reply, found itself unanswered. In that silence, certainty weakened. The shock above ground did not translate below. Pressure traveled downward and dispersed without damage. Fire consumed what it could reach, then exhausted itself. Decree rearranged names and ownership, yet found no purchase beneath the surface. The cisterns absorbed consequence as they had been shaped to do. They did not harden against threat. They accepted it and let it pass. Those who enacted erasure mistook destruction for completion. Buildings fell and were not rebuilt. Records were scattered and not recovered. The surface bore the marks of decisive action. Yet beneath, the conditions of preservation remained intact. What had been set aside continued to rest, untouched by the urgency above. The deeper system did not mourn loss. It did not resist change. It simply continued. Absence became a form of protection more effective than concealment ever could be. What could not be pointed to could not be condemned. What could not be proven could not be destroyed. Authority relies upon visibility to assert itself. Deprived of this, it faltered. The shore learned this lesson without instruction. It watched power expend itself upon surfaces while depth remained beyond reach. The ground itself seemed to cooperate. Collapsed entrances appeared natural. Soil shifted into seams without disturbance. Water sealed passages through slow, patient seepage. Nothing dramatic announced these closures. They happened as part of ordinary decay, indistinguishable from neglect. This ordinariness ensured survival. What appears intentional invites investigation. What appears accidental is passed by. Above, new orders attempted to establish permanence through display. They raised their own marks, confident that visibility secured memory. These too rested upon ground shaped to endure them without allegiance. The cisterns did not oppose what was built above. They accepted weight impartially. In doing so, they preserved what lay beneath without requiring resistance. Those who remembered fragments of the older order learned restraint. They did not rush to recover what had been hidden. Retrieval during scrutiny would have betrayed the very conditions that ensured survival. Waiting became the final discipline. Trust was placed not in secrecy alone, but in time's capacity to exhaust attention. Authority moves quickly. Its patience is limited. The cisterns were built for longer spans. As scrutiny faded, it left behind altered surfaces and wounded memory, yet beneath, nothing had been lost. Silence remained unchanged. The deeper system had not triumphed. It had simply endured. In enduring, it revealed a truth that no decree could suppress, that survival does not always belong to what stands tallest or speaks loudest. The shore carried this lesson forward quietly. It learned that some structures persist precisely because they do not argue for themselves. They do not claim innocence or assert worth. They wait. In that waiting, they pass beyond the reach of accusation. The ground became witness to this endurance without recording it. Stone and earth held what had been given to them, indifferent to the rise and fall of names. The attempts at erasure completed their course and moved on, leaving behind a landscape altered but not emptied. Above, loss was visible and mourned. Below, preservation continued without acknowledgement. The deeper order remained intact, not because it had been defended, but because it had been shaped to require no defense at all, resting quietly as attention drifted elsewhere. When the force of erasure withdrew, it left behind a surface changed in form but not in function. New claims settled where old ones had been stripped away. Fresh names were spoken over ground that had learned not to listen. Above, ownership shifted, yet beneath, the conditions of endurance remained unchanged. The Cisterns did not mark the passing of authority. They continued to hold what had been entrusted to them, indifferent to the language of power that rose and fell overhead. Those who now governed the shore inherited stability without understanding its source. They occupied halls rebuilt upon disciplined ground and found them unusually reliable. Supplies endured where they expected loss. Foundations held where haste had guided construction. These outcomes were accepted as fortune or providence. No one looked downward for explanation. The deeper order, preserved through absence, remained invisible precisely because it functioned so well. Silence proved to be the most effective answer to scrutiny. What could not be questioned could not be accused. The Cisterns did not conceal themselves through deception. They simply aligned with neglect. In time, the urgency that had driven erasure spent itself. Attention moved on to new concerns, new borders, new names to be asserted and erased in turn. What lay beneath had outlasted the moment by refusing to engage with it. The ground itself bore the memory of pressure without retaining its shape. Where halls had burned, soil settled back into quiet. Where entrances had collapsed, earth filled the void without disturbance. These closures did not require repair. They completed the design. What had once been accessible by memory alone now rested beyond reach entirely, protected by layers of ordinary forgetting. The Cisterns had passed from hidden to unimagined. Those few who understood the depth of what remained did not gather to preserve it. They allowed their knowledge to thin further, trusting the system more than themselves. Speech was avoided. Instruction was withheld. Memory, once shared carefully, was permitted to dissolve. This relinquishment was not loss. It was final alignment. The system no longer depended on human continuity. It relied wholly on stone, earth, and time. The aftermath of erasure revealed a pattern repeated often across the shore. What survives confrontation is not always what resists most fiercely. It is what stands apart from confrontation altogether. The Cisterns had not been spared by mercy or overlooked by chance. They had been shaped beyond the reach of the very mechanisms that sought to destroy them. Authority had no language for what did not present itself. Above ground, new orders repeated old habits. They cataloged what they could see. They measured what could be grasped. They trusted that control followed enumeration. Each cycle reinforced the same blindness. Depth remained unaccounted for because it refused enumeration. What could not be listed could not be governed. In this omission, preservation found its shelter. The shore adapted quietly. It learned to absorb upheaval without transmitting it downward. Even when conflict brushed close, the ground accepted weight without cracking. This capacity altered how violence expressed itself. Destruction exhausted itself quickly where there was nothing beneath to rupture. Loss remained surface-bound. Recovery followed sooner than expected. The deeper system continued to moderate consequence without being named as such. Absence, once feared, revealed its strength. The lack of visible evidence prevented not only destruction but also appropriation. What survives invisibly cannot be claimed. The Cisterns belonged to no authority precisely because they declared no allegiance. They preserved without choosing sides. This neutrality allowed them to endure through successive regimes without adaptation. Time extended the lesson. As generations passed, the memory of erasure itself thinned. Stories lost detail, then coherence, then urgency. What remained was landscape that behaved with unusual steadiness. People trusted it without reason. They built upon it without hesitation. They depended on it without knowing what it held. The Cisterns had succeeded in removing themselves not only from danger but from thought. This removal was complete. Even curiosity dulled where nothing invited it. No marks suggested inquiry. No irregularities provoked excavation. The ground offered no resistance to ordinary use and no reward to deeper probing. Its calm discouraged intrusion. Thus the deepest preservation was achieved not by hiding something remarkable, but by ensuring that nothing seemed remarkable at all. In this state, the system reached a form of quiet invulnerability, not because it could not be destroyed, but because it could not be located within the frameworks that define destruction. It existed outside accusation, outside proof, outside desire. The Cisterns had passed beyond the reach of erasure by aligning with what erasure overlooks. The shore carried forward, bearing layers of history that spoke loudly of loss and change. Beneath those layers, the deeper order remained untouched, not waiting for vindication, not seeking return. It simply endured, holding what had been given to it with the same restraint that had shaped it from the beginning. Thus, in the wake of attempted erasure, preservation was confirmed rather than diminished. What had been built in silence proved strongest when silence was imposed from above. The ground learned once more that survival often belongs to what does not answer when called, and that the most enduring structures are those that never enter the argument at all, resting beyond reach as time moves steadily on. The withdrawal did not resemble retreat. It unfolded without signal, guided by the same restraint that had shaped the depths. Those who still carried memory understood that presence had become liability. They did not gather to preserve what they knew. They allowed distance to widen between knowledge and keeper. Paths once walked with certainty were avoided. Hands that had known where stone yielded were turned to other labors. Continuity no longer depended on remembrance held tightly. It depended on release, knowledge thinned by design. What had once been carried whole was divided, then divided again, until no single mind held enough to betray the shape of the system. Fragments were passed only when needed, and even then without explanation. A gesture replaced instruction. A habit replaced a map. When risk outweighed purpose, memory was allowed to dissolve entirely. This loss was not mourned, it was recognized as protection. Some cisterns were surrendered fully to stillness. Water entered them without guidance and was allowed to remain. Channels once tended were left untouched. Stone accepted the slow work of damp and mineral without resistance. These chambers did not fail. They changed state. What had preserved records now preserved silence alone. Their role shifted without vanishing. Others remained in use, yet their use altered. Maintenance fell to hands unaware of origin or intent. They cleaned and cleared without knowing why certain measures mattered. Practice endured while meaning faded. Purpose transformed quietly. What had once been deliberate preservation became customary storage. What had been set aside with ceremony became something simply kept. The distinction mattered little to the stone. It continued to moderate, to steady, to hold. The system no longer required understanding to function. It had crossed the threshold where intention gives way to condition. The cisterns endured because they were no longer recognized as exceptional. Stories began to gather where knowledge had thinned. People spoke of certain places where goods lasted longer, where damp did not ruin and cold did not bite as deeply. These stories lacked detail. They did not point downward. They floated above ground as explanation enough. Storage became legend. Legend softened into habit. Habit required no story to justify it. People returned to places that worked without asking why they worked. This transformation freed the system from loyalty. No oath bound it now. No keeper defended it. Stone and gravity became its only governors. The earth pressed downward as it always had. The chambers responded as they had been shaped to respond. Continuity passed fully into material form. What survives longest does so when it no longer depends on will. Those who once would have recognized the deeper order felt no urgency to reclaim it. They understood that retrieval was not always preservation. Some things endure best when untouched. By relinquishing oversight, they allowed the system to complete its evolution. It became self-sufficient not by expansion, but by simplification. What could be forgotten was forgotten. What remained continued without comment. Human presence brushed past this transformation lightly. Workers repaired walls above chambers they did not suspect. Children played where entrances had once been remembered. The ground held firm beneath them, unconcerned with recognition. The cisterns did not require secrecy enforced by vigilance. They required only that no one felt compelled to disturb them. Familiarity dulled curiosity. Reliability discouraged inquiry. Even where water reclaimed some depths, the system absorbed the change without loss of integrity. Flooded chambers became buffers, moderating pressure and damp for those beyond them. Their function shifted, yet their contribution remained. What had been shaped for one purpose adapted naturally to another. This adaptability was not planned in detail. It arose from restraint applied at the beginning. Structures built without excess accept change without collapse. The absence of creators marked a final passage. What they had shaped no longer bore their imprint in any visible way. It existed independently, aligned with forces that do not require allegiance. The cisterns belonged to the ground now, not to memory or name. This belonging ensured endurance beyond any lineage that might have claimed them. Survival occurred through relinquishment rather than resistance. No attempt was made to restore what had been lost above ground. No effort was spent reclaiming recognition. The system did not compete with surface history, it withdrew from it. In doing so, it avoided the cycles of rise and fall that consumed what sought prominence. The Cisterns endured by becoming ordinary. Time confirmed this choice. Years passed without incident. Use continued without awareness. Neglect caused no harm. The deeper order no longer registered as something that could be threatened. It had dissolved into the fabric of the shore. What had once been hidden now simply existed, beyond the reach of concern. This withdrawal was complete not when no one remembered, but when remembrance ceased to matter. The system did not await return. It did not long for rediscovery. It held what it held, governed by stone and depth alone. Transformation had carried it from guarded design into quiet permanence. In this state, continuity rested securely. It no longer depended on those who had first imagined it. It did not require renewal through intention. It endured because it had been shaped to endure, and because those who might have clung to it instead released it to time. The Cisterns remained, changed in purpose yet unchanged in form, steady beneath the shore as memory thinned and life moved on. As memory thinned, the system's rhythm settled into the ground itself. What had once required discernment now functioned through habit alone. People acted without awareness of origin, guided by outcomes rather than instruction. A storehouse was chosen because it had always served well. A cellar was cleared because damp did not linger there. These choices repeated across seasons, reinforcing the deeper order without ever naming it. The Cisterns no longer depended on intention. They depended on repetition. The transformation altered how continuity was perceived. What had been preserved deliberately was now preserved incidentally. Goods placed below ground were no longer entrusted with ceremony. They were simply stored. Yet the effect remained unchanged. Stone continued to steady temperature. Darkness continued to slow decay. Silence continued to protect what rested within. Meaning endured not because it was guarded, but because conditions favored its survival. The system's strength lay in having passed beyond awareness. Hands unfamiliar with the original discipline maintained what they did not understand. They cleared channels because water flowed better afterward. They repaired walls where seepage threatened because seepage caused inconvenience. These acts preserved the deeper order without acknowledging it. Practice survived even as explanation vanished. This separation ensured that no single disruption could unravel the whole. What had been built no longer relied on coherence of thought, only on coherence of effect. Legend played its quiet role. Stories softened the edges of memory without sharpening them. People spoke of fortunate ground and untroubled cellars. Such words satisfied curiosity without inviting inquiry. Legend absorbed attention that might otherwise have pressed downward. It gave explanation without precision. In doing so, it shielded what lay beneath from scrutiny. The Cisterns benefited from this vagueness. What is explained loosely is rarely investigated closely. As generations passed, the original purpose blurred entirely. What had been instruments of patience became features of the landscape. They were not revered, they were not feared, they were accepted. Acceptance proved more durable than reverence ever could. What is revered attracts caretakers and challengers alike. What is accepted simply remains. The system's self-sufficiency revealed itself most clearly in neglect. When maintenance ceased, collapse did not follow. Stone had been set to endure without constant correction. Water, when left unguided, found paths that did not threaten integrity. Pressure distributed itself naturally through spaces shaped to accept it. Even disuse served preservation. The Cisterns improved through stillness rather than deteriorating. Human movement continued above without awareness of what supported it. Weight passed safely, structures rested evenly, storms struck and withdrew. The ground absorbed consequence without transferring shock downward. This moderation altered how disruption manifested. Damage remained surface-bound. Recovery required less effort where depth had been disciplined. The shore's resilience owed nothing to vigilance. It owed everything to relinquishment. The absence of creators freed the system from narrative. No origin story invited reinterpretation. No founding act demanded commemoration. Without narrative, the Cisterns escaped the cycles of meaning that erode structures over time. They did not need to be explained anew to each generation. They simply functioned. Function replaced story as the carrier of continuity. This transformation did not diminish what had been preserved. On the contrary, it ensured survival through eras that would have consumed anything dependent on explanation. When circumstances shifted and needs changed, the Cisterns adapted by remaining what they were. They did not require modification to remain relevant. Their restraint had anticipated change without predicting its form. Even where water reclaimed some chambers entirely, the system held. Flooded spaces moderated pressure and protected others beyond them. What appeared as loss served balance. The builders' early refusal of excess allowed such adaptation. Structures built without surplus accept transformation without failure. The cisterns demonstrated this truth repeatedly, quietly, without witness. The shore itself learned to rely on this unseen steadiness. Settlement patterns adjusted unconsciously. Work clustered where endurance had proven reliable. Over time, the ground's behavior shaped human arrangement more decisively than any decree. This shaping occurred without resistance because it offered benefit without demand. People accepted what worked. In relinquishment, the system achieved a form of quiet sovereignty. It did not rule. It underlay. It shaped outcomes without asserting cause. Such influence does not invite challenge. It does not provoke reform. It persists beneath attention, altering the course of events without ever appearing within them. What remained of the original intent existed only as alignment. Stone continued to meet earth as it had been taught. Depth continued to steady surface. The cisterns held what they held, whether water, goods, or silence itself. Their transformation was complete when they no longer required recognition to survive. Thus continuity passed fully into the care of time. The system endured not because it was remembered, but because it had been shaped to function without memory. Survival through relinquishment proved stronger than survival through defense. The cisterns remained beneath the shore, no longer hidden, no longer guarded, simply present, steady and sufficient as the land above changed and moved on. Centuries settled one upon another with little ceremony. Stone above was laid and lifted again, timber rotted and was replaced. Roads shifted their lines and walls followed new measures. Through all of this layering, the depths remained unchanged. The cisterns did not register the passage of years as accumulation. They held their form as if time moved past them rather than through them. What had been shaped to endure neglect now received it fully, and neglect proved gentle. New powers arrived bearing their own weights and assumptions. They inherited ground that behaved with unusual loyalty, yet they mistook this fidelity for fortune or providence. They set foundations where others had stood and found them firm. They deepened wells only to meet resistance that defied expectation. Water appeared where it should not and withdrew where it ought to have lingered. These outcomes were noted, then accepted. Success seldom provokes inquiry. Excavations sometimes began with confidence and ended without explanation. Tools met stone where soil had been expected. Trenches filled too quickly to continue. Work halted not from fear but from inconvenience. The ground offered no reward for persistence. It yielded nothing of spectacle, nothing to justify effort. Thus the depths remained unbroken, protected by their refusal to astonish. Wells told their own quiet story. Some drew steadily through drought, others fell silent despite proximity to water. These behaviors contradicted surface logic, yet they repeated with consistency. Over time, patterns were observed without being understood. Builders adjusted their practices accordingly. They trusted experience over theory. The hidden order shaped habit without ever entering thought. Foundations endured where storms should have undone them. Walls held through seasons that shattered others nearby. The difference lay not in skill alone, but in ground prepared long before skill had been applied. Pressure distributed itself evenly beneath these structures. Shock dissolved downward rather than traveling upward. Damage, when it came, remained limited. Recovery followed with less cost than expected. Those who studied such matters sensed irregularities. Measurements did not always align with known principles. Results contradicted prediction. Yet lacking language to name the cause, they assigned it to chance. Coincidence became explanation enough. Without proof, curiosity softened into speculation and then into silence. The cisterns did not require disbelief to survive. They required only that belief never sharpened into certainty. Trade followed these quiet advantages. Routes favored places where delay did not threaten loss. Markets clustered where storage endured. Settlements grew where ground accepted weight without complaint. These choices were pragmatic rather than ideological. Over time, they shaped patterns of movement and rest that outlasted the authorities that first benefited from them. The hidden continuity guided commerce without directing it. Settlement followed the same path. People returned to places that proved resilient. Rebuilding occurred where rebuilding had succeeded before. Abandonment struck where ground betrayed effort. These outcomes hardened into tradition. Villages persisted not because they were chosen, but because they endured. The Cisterns influenced this endurance without ever being named as cause. Memory of origin dissolved entirely. What had been built for a specific order now served none. It preserved without allegiance. It supported without instruction. The system passed into anonymity so complete that it could no longer be claimed. This anonymity ensured survival across eras that consumed anything bound to identity. The influence exerted by these depths did not resemble rule. It did not command or direct. It shaped probability. It made some outcomes more likely than others. This subtle guidance altered the course of events without asserting itself within them. Quiet influence requires no recognition. It operates best when unseen. Time continued its layering, indifferent to the hidden order beneath. Names changed, borders shifted, beliefs rose and fell. Through all of this, the ground maintained its behavior. It accepted weight. It moderated water. It absorbed shock. These actions carried consequences forward long after intent had vanished. The Cisterns did not expand their reach. They deepened it. Their effect grew not through addition, but through accumulation of consequence. Each season that passed without failure reinforced reliance. Each storm endured, strengthened preference. Over centuries, this reliance shaped landscapes more decisively than any decree. Scholars occasionally returned to the question of irregular ground. They proposed explanations that satisfied form without addressing depth. Their conclusions circulated briefly, then faded. The land continued to behave as it always had. Theory bent to practice. Practice endured. What remained was persistence without purpose. The system no longer pointed toward any future retrieval or return. It did not await recognition. It simply functioned. In this state, it became indistinguishable from the land itself. The cisterns ceased to be structures and became condition. Thus, the long consequences unfolded without drama. Influence passed quietly from depth to surface and back again. The ground shaped what rose upon it and how long it stood. No authority claimed this shaping. No record preserved its origin. The consequence was endurance without dominion, stability without command, continuity carried forward by stone and time alone. The long consequence of such persistence revealed itself most clearly where expectation failed without catastrophe. When storms tore at the coast, damage followed familiar lines yet stopped short of ruin in certain places. Roofs were stripped while walls remained. Quays cracked yet did not sink. The ground accepted violence and dissipated it without echo. Those who repaired what was broken found their labor lighter than feared. They spoke of favorable ground and moved on, unaware that favor had been shaped long before their need arose. Patterns of endurance gathered slowly, too slowly to be named as pattern. A harbor survived 3 generations of winter while another nearby failed twice. A market endured fire and returned to form, while others vanished after lesser trials. These outcomes were not dramatic enough to provoke wonder. They were merely consistent. Consistency breeds trust, and trust shapes habit. Over time, habit becomes destiny. The cisterns, untouched and unseen, continued to govern the movement of water and weight. They moderated extremes without intervention. In drought, moisture lingered deeper than expected. In flood, excess found paths that spared the surface. These behaviors altered how people planned without ever appearing in their plans. Builders chose sites that felt steady. Farmers avoided ground that seemed unreliable. The land instructed without speaking. Excavations that halted without explanation became part of local memory. Stories circulated of places where digging never paid. Such places were avoided thereafter. This avoidance preserved what lay beneath more effectively than any barrier. The cisterns benefited from discouragement born of inconvenience rather than fear. Nothing repels curiosity more reliably than effort without reward. Over generations, the absence of collapse became more influential than the presence of strength. Structures that simply remained altered expectations. People began to assume that some ground was naturally dependable. This assumption guided settlement more strongly than any survey. The cisterns shaped landscapes by shaping assumption, a force more enduring than decree. Trade adapted to these assumptions as well. Merchants returned to places where loss was rare. They lingered longer where storage endured. These choices accumulated into routes and hubs that outlived the conditions that first favored them. Commerce flowed along paths of least decay. The hidden order thus influenced wealth without ever seeking it. Settlement followed commerce, and commerce followed endurance. Villages expanded where rebuilding proved worthwhile. Others dwindled where effort exceeded return. These decisions were practical, unburdened by ideology. Over centuries, they produced a map of persistence that bore no relation to power or proclamation. The Cisterns lay beneath this map, shaping it through consequence alone. Scholars who encountered anomalies often lacked patience to pursue them beyond surface explanation. Without records to guide inquiry, they returned to accepted measures. Coincidence remained sufficient. The absence of dramatic discovery ensured that investigation never hardened into threat. The system thrived in this space between notice and neglect. What had once been deliberate preservation now functioned as natural advantage. The Cisterns had crossed fully into the realm of the unremarkable. They were no longer hidden because nothing sought them. Their endurance blended into the character of the land. Depth became indistinguishable from ground itself. This indistinguishability granted a final protection. What cannot be separated from its surroundings cannot be targeted. The Cisterns no longer appeared as structures at all. They were conditions, shaping outcomes without presenting form. Such conditions resist erasure because they cannot be named. The long influence of this depth did not gather toward domination. It did not seek to control or direct. It allowed stability to emerge where it could and to fail where it must. Its effect was selective without intention. Quiet influence does not choose. It permits. As centuries passed, even the idea of a hidden order dissolved. The ground simply behaved as it did. People adjusted, prospered, or moved on. No memory pointed downward, no legend preserved origin. The Cisterns had completed their passage from creation to consequence. Time continued to layer itself above them. New materials replaced old. New forms rose where others fell. Yet beneath, the same spaces held steady. They had become part of the land's reasoning, responding to pressure and water as if they had always been there. Their endurance no longer depended on neglect alone. It depended on assimilation. Thus, the long consequences settled into the world quietly. Influence persisted without intent. Stability emerged without command. The Cisterns shaped history not by asserting presence, but by refusing disappearance. They endured not as relics of an order, but as foundations of persistence itself. What had been built for a single purpose now served only time. It carried forward no message, no allegiance, no demand. It offered only continuity. Stone held its measure. Depth held its calm. The land above lived and changed, unaware that beneath it rested an alignment so complete that it no longer needed to be remembered to endure. The chambers persist without posture or claim. They lie where they were set, unchanged in their restraint, neither inviting nor refusing attention. Stone rests against earth as it has learned to do, carrying weight without complaint. Moisture moves slowly, guided by angles long settled. Air circulates with patience, entering and departing without disturbance. Nothing within these spaces announces its endurance. Nothing requires witness to justify its presence. The shore above continues its long breathing. Tides advance and withdraw. Wind scours timber and salt settles into grain. Footsteps pass, then fade. Replaced. The surface lives in motion, shaped by forgetting as much as by memory. Beneath this movement, the chambers remain still, unaffected by the cadence of change. They do not mirror the world above. They underlie it. The Cisterns do not wait in anticipation. Their waiting contains no expectation. It is simply their condition. They hold what they hold because they were shaped to do so. Water gathers and leaves without residue. Stone absorbs damp and releases it again. Darkness remains even and complete. Silence settles into every seam. These elements perform their quiet work without deviation, indifferent to the passage of years. What rests within them carries no mark of urgency. Some chambers are empty, holding only air and shadow. Others contain remnants placed there long ago, now indistinguishable from the conditions that preserve them. No boundary separates what was stored from the space that holds it. Over time, object and chamber approach equivalence. Meaning rests not in distinction, but in continuity. The Cisterns offer no instruction. They do not teach through symbol or inscription. Their lesson is implicit, embedded in function rather than speech. They demonstrate that endurance need not be asserted, that preservation can occur without display. This demonstration requires no audience. It unfolds regardless of notice. Those who cross the shore rarely sense what lies beneath. When they do, the sensation is vague, a feeling of steadiness without source. Ground feels reliable. Structures hold. Wells behave with familiar unpredictability that somehow proves dependable. These impressions pass without reflection. Life above proceeds unconcerned with the reasons for its own stability. The chambers neither guard nor conceal in the ordinary sense. They are not locked. They are not defended. Their protection lies in proportion and placement, in being exactly what they need to be and nothing more. Excess would invite inquiry. Absence invites neglect. Neglect proves sufficient. Time continues to press downward, not as force but as accumulation. Layers settle above the cisterns, each era adding weight without penetrating depth. This pressure does not threaten collapse. It confirms alignment. Stone answers weight with stillness. Earth answers stone with acceptance. Together they form a condition that resists disruption without resisting change. The cisterns do not preserve history as sequence. They preserve it as potential. What lies within them is not arranged for recounting. It is arranged for survival. Memory, when retrieved, returns intact not because it was protected fiercely, but because it was allowed to rest. The chambers escort meaning across long intervals without insisting on return. There is no promise attached to this endurance. The cisterns do not guarantee rediscovery. They do not ensure that what was preserved will ever be needed again. They accept the possibility that rest may become permanence. This acceptance is part of their restraint. Preservation does not require destiny. It requires only patience. Above, the shore forgets readily. Forgetting is not failure there. It is rhythm. Old works are replaced without ceremony. New paths form where old ones fade. Forgetting clears space for movement. Beneath, forgetting performs a different function. It shelters what must not be worn by constant recall. Together, surface and depth maintain balance. The chambers do not judge what they hold. They preserve without distinction. Water, memory, restraint all receive the same care. This indifference protects them from hierarchy and from dispute. What is equal is less likely to be contested. The cisterns avoid argument by offering no preference. Even now, when attention occasionally turns downward, the response is the same. The ground reveals nothing extraordinary. Stone appears as stone. Water behaves as water. Darkness remains unbroken. Without spectacle, curiosity softens and turns away. The chambers continue unremarked. What survives beneath the shore does so without ambition. It does not seek to influence events above. It does not shape outcomes directly. Its influence, when it occurs, is incidental, arising from stability rather than intent. This absence of desire ensures longevity. What does not seek control is rarely challenged. The cisterns remain as they were shaped to remain. They do not decay into ruin. They do not rise into monument. They occupy a middle state, neither lost nor revealed. In this state, they fulfill their purpose completely. They escort what matters across oblivion by refusing to name it. Stone continues its quiet labor. Earth holds, water moves, silence rests. These actions repeat without variation. The chambers do not tire. They do not age. They do not adapt because they do not need to. Their alignment was sufficient from the beginning. Above, life continues to speak loudly of its own changes. Below, the cisterns offer no message at all. They do not explain themselves. They do not request attention. They remain, unremarkable in silence, steady beneath the shore, holding the calm certainty that endurance does not always announce itself, and that what survives longest often does so by refusing to be known. The chambers persist beyond intention, sustained by the same quiet measures that first shaped them. Their endurance does not belong to the past alone, nor does it reach toward any promised future. It exists in a present that does not announce itself. Stone remains settled into its courses. Joints hold without strain. The earth presses evenly, neither threatening nor yielding. What was entrusted to depth continues to be held, not as relic, but as presence. Water enters and withdraws according to conditions older than naming. It gathers where it must, thins where it should, and leaves without residue. In some chambers, it rests long enough to take the shape of stillness itself. In others, it passes quietly, fulfilling its role without imprint. This movement is not monitored, it is not corrected, it is allowed. Allowance proves sufficient. Air follows similar discipline. It moves slowly, exchanging warmth and cool without disturbance. It carries no scent that lingers. It offers no signal of occupancy. The chambers remain neutral in their breath, preserving what lies within by refusing to alter it. Neutrality becomes preservation. Silence continues to settle without effort. Sound, when introduced, dissolves quickly, leaving no echo to mark intrusion. This quality is not imposed. It arises from proportion and depth. The cisterns do not enforce quiet, they generate it naturally. In doing so, they shelter what rests within from the abrasion of attention. The absence of visitation strengthens this condition. Each year untouched confirms alignment. No hand polishes stone. No voice rehearses memory. The chambers refine themselves through neglect. They remain fit for purpose because purpose has been distilled to endurance alone. Nothing within them depends on return. What was once placed below has entered a state beyond use. It is neither active nor discarded. It rests in suspension, preserved without expectation. The distinction between what was stored and what surrounds it fades further with time. Stone, water, air, and object share the same stillness. Meaning no longer asserts itself. It waits without insistence. Above, the shore continues its long movement. Settlement shifts, recedes, and reforms. Trade follows opportunity, then abandons it. Structures rise and fall according to need. All of this occurs without reference to what lies beneath. The chambers do not require awareness to remain effective. Their influence, when it appears, does so indirectly, through steadiness rather than intervention. The cisterns neither invite nor resist rediscovery. Should attention ever turn downward with patience and care, the chambers would respond as they always have. Stone would reveal only stone. Water would behave as water. Silence would persist. There would be no unveiling, only encounter. What lies beneath does not change its nature based on who stands above it. This indifference protects the chambers more fully than secrecy ever could. They are not hidden by deception. They are hidden by sufficiency. What satisfies curiosity at the surface rarely provokes dissent. What appears ordinary is passed over. The cisterns have mastered ordinariness. The endurance they embody carries no lesson inscribed upon it. It offers no warning and no promise. It simply demonstrates through its continued presence that some works are shaped to persist without acknowledgement. Such persistence does not seek admiration. It does not require justification. It remains because it was aligned correctly from the beginning. The chambers have no voice, yet they speak through consequence. Where ground holds, it holds because depth allows it. Where structures endure, they endure because pressure is received rather than resisted. These outcomes occur without declaration. They do not trace themselves back to origin. They stand as results without explanation. What remains below is not a remnant of authority or belief. It is not evidence waiting to be interpreted. It is a condition sustained through restraint. The cisterns do not preserve power, they preserve possibility. They hold space for meaning to survive without being forced into expression. In this, they differ from monuments and records. Monuments demand attention, records demand reading. The cisterns demand nothing. They exist outside the cycle of assertion and response. Their strength lies in refusal to participate. What does not participate cannot be contested. Time continues its slow passage, adding layers without disruption. Each layer presses downward gently, reinforcing alignment. The chambers accept this pressure as confirmation rather than threat. They were shaped for accumulation. Weight strengthens them. Forgetting protects them. Silence completes them. The shore above may one day change beyond recognition. New forms may rise where old ones have vanished entirely. Languages may pass away. Beliefs may leave no trace. Through all of this, the cisterns will remain as they are, unaltered in their restraint. They will not mourn loss or celebrate change. They will simply hold. What endures beneath the Baltic shore is not an answer, nor a secret waiting to be revealed. It is an example of survival without spectacle. It shows that continuity can be shaped deliberately, then released to time without supervision. It demonstrates that meaning does not require constant remembrance to remain intact. The chambers offer no message to the present. They offer no guidance to the future. They rest between the two, escorting what was entrusted to them across long intervals of forgetting. This escort requires no movement, only patience. Stone continues to hold, earth continues to accept, water continues to move, silence continues to settle. These actions repeat without variation, forming a rhythm slower than history. Within that rhythm, the cisterns endure, unchanged and unremarked, proving only that not everything that survives seeks to be known, and that some forms of endurance remain most complete when they ask nothing of the world above them.